Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. And I'm going to speak today about, my name is Anna, I'm going to speak today about reputation, finance, and performance, and how cyber security incidents can influence that. So there were many prominent speakers, and there were speeches about incidents themselves and different reasons for incidents. But it is also very important to understand the impact. And well, I'm engaged and I work at a law firm, but I also have cybersecurity certificates, and also have been engaged actively in carrying out GDPR audits during the last few years. I am a certified data protection officer both in Europe and Latvia, and I did it both from legal and cybersecurity side. So I saw different approaches to how it is possible to do that. And I represent a law office, and you know that usually people think about lawyers that lawyers scare people. Their task is to say everything is bad, this is bad, you should be afraid of this and that. But today I'm also going to speak about different risks and the approaches to solving these risks. And I think that it's actually quite important to have information about these risks, because without this information you will not be ready for these risks and you will not be ready to tackle them. So the first step is to gain knowledge about such potential risks and potential cases and other experiences related to different cyber incidents. As I mentioned, I'm going to speak about financial impact, I'm going to speak about reputational impact, and I'm going to speak about impact on performance of organization and authorities, and then approaches to minimizing this negative impact. So, finance. Due to the fact that I have worked many with GDPR, I also worked a lot with and know a lot about actually GDPR fines and GDPR penalties imposed with regards to violations related to personal data protection, which is very important and interesting, because with all that Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, Google cases, actually many specialists thought that many fines would be imposed for legal collection, sharing of data, targeting, etc. But what is interesting that actually fines for not ensuring security of personal data, actually security thing, are in the top, both from the amount of the fines imposed and the amount of money that were that are subject to be paid by the violators. And also what is interesting that not all of these fines are imposed on private companies. Some of these fines are also imposed on public authorities. Well, it's not really possible in all member states, but for example, you can see that the highest possible fine here is imposed on is planned to be imposed on a private company, and does anyone know what is the case? It's British Airways. Cyber incident and data hack related to British Airways. But there are also fines, this one and this one, that were imposed on public authorities, and this one is actually a pretty big one, was imposed on Bulgarian State Revenue Service for not ensuring personal data security. So you can imagine that for a public authority, tax authority, that is a shame, and it's actually a big financial impact to be subject to such a big fine. So what are the general reasons for such penalties according to the GDPR? Very often fines are related to the failure to report an incident, and maybe you have heard that we have 72 hours to report an incident, and it's quite widespread that many companies do not really have time or do not have capability to do that. Another thing that is also very popular and related in many cases to these fines is related to illegal disclosure or illegal access to personal data. And this was also related to one of the biggest cases, and this is this fine, I guess the second one from the top, that is also planned to be imposed for Marriott data leak. And maybe you have heard of it, and this case is also very interesting because of the fact that actually the reason for that was that Marriott acquired Starwoods, another group. So this was a merger and acquisition case, and Marriott acquired other company that already experienced data breach, and they already had problems like 2 years ago, and this data has already been leaked. And Marriott had no knowledge about that, and then they discovered that after already they acquired that company, and well, now they're subject to fine. And you imagine that you acquire some kind of a broken car with huge problems without knowing nothing about that, and then you are subject to fines, reputational damages, and other stuff. Another thing that is also related to unauthorized access and unauthorized data disclosure is quite frequent in financial sector, and they were fined. One of the fines actually was not far from Latvia, it was in Lithuania. Maybe you also have heard about that, is that data about all financial transactions of a company that whose main business was related to money transfers was publicly available during 2 years, within 2 days, and well, apparently they didn't know that about that because they also failed to report a breach. Quite similar case was related to Romanian bank and also to the Bulgarian tax authority, who also lost the data of all taxpayers of Bulgaria, which is a quite big amount of people. Another case also with unauthorized access to data, and this is also one of the fines imposed on municipal authority on a school, took place in Norway when a school developed an application for communication between parents, teachers, school, and well, this application allowed to exchange different data between parents. So parents would if parents wanted to notify teachers that their child is ill, they could also send some kind of sensitive health information via this application. And unfortunately, due to some bad practices related to and bad configurations, unauthorized parties were allowed to access the information and access all the information that was transferred through the application. And this fine was imposed also on school in Norway. Also, some fines are related to picking up wrong vendors, and this is also tricky in GDPR case, in personal data case, because due to the GDPR provisions, if you use some kind of any third-party vendor and you entrust personal data that you have on your clients, on your employees to such vendor, and if you fail to conclude a good contract, GDPR-compliant contract, that there is a high risk that you might be responsible for mistakes of your vendor. This is also one of the cases that took place and related one of the penalties that can be seen here. Also, some access problems, access management problems and one of the examples is the case that took place in Netherlands in the hospital, where there was some kind of, one of the patients was a pop star who tried to commit a suicide but failed and got into a hospital. And due to the fact that this person was a celebrity, all of the doctors, but not all, but many doctors wanted to know what happened, what is the medical state of the person, and the hospital concluded that actually a lot of doctors who were not involved in treating this person went through the medical records of this person because they have some kind of potential personal interest about that. So these are general reasons for GDPR fines, but they're also not only Europe. And there are many data breaches, not only related to personal data, that took place also in the US, in American countries. And there are several examples where, for example, Anthem, an insurance company, was forced to pay $16 million because of a hack. Yeah, so there was a hacker who accessed their data, but they didn't manage to introduce corresponding security measures. Facebook, well, one of the largest fines is $5 billion, but I mean, you know that Facebook is also involved in different other violations related to personal data, so this fine was like a cumulative fine, not related only to security incidents that they experienced, I guess, almost a year ago. Yahoo case, not a very new one. but there was a decision, quite recent one, about also 35 million fine, and also due to data leak that took place due to hackers. Equifax case, of course, that also was not only related to Europe but also to the UK, but the fine still was imposed only in the US. Also quite big, 700 millions. Uber case, and Uber case was interesting because they tried to hide the data leak, and they tried to pay hackers who accessed their data to delete the data that they copied from Uber, and they failed to do that, and all that came public, and yeah, the case was not very pleasant, and they are still experiencing some problems in Europe for personal data violations. Ashley Medicine, one of the loudest case and quite sensitive cases, because this was an application for a person who would like to have love affairs outside their marriage. And well, quite sensitive thing, and they built their platform so that the names were not known, but all emails. So the clients used their emails, and at a certain point of time, hacker accessed all these emails, and they were available also to journalists, and much of this information was published. There were some suicides that were followed by that because there were some public figures. There were some figures who were like persons who were not supposed to have such affairs because they have some kind of public reputation. And yes, and also some person from churches. So the case had a big impact on publicity, but you see that for a certain reason fine was not so big because company cooperated, and by the way, after that they were forced to rebrand the application, but still they are still on the market and they have a different name. But these were fines, penalties that are imposed by authorities. Except for such fines and related to the activity of public authorities, there are also damages. So like persons who are involved in breaches, private persons can lodge a claim, go to court against the company if they can prove that they suffered certain damage. And well, and most of these cases are related, loudest cases also related to that loudest data breaches that I have already mentioned, like Marriott case, and people are still gathering for a class action. British Airways, there are like many opportunities to be a part of a class action, and an approximate amount of compensation that you can get from this case is from £2,000 to £16,000, depending on the impact that you suffered. Equifax case, they have just made a settlement, and this amount, 1.4 billion, is for the whole class action, not for one person, but for all persons involved and who participate in this class action. Ticketmaster, you may have heard about this case as well, that also touched the UK. Also is subject to a class action of £5 million in the UK. Well, people are not so active in continental Europe, yes, but this trend is starting and is developing. There are also other financial consequences, like in cases of mergers and acquisitions. I mentioned Marriott, so imagine that they acquired Star Wars Group with already existing problem for $13.6 billion, but the cost of the breach was $1.5 billion. So, well, the price could have been lower actually, or maybe the deal would not work. So if they knew, they would have had an opportunity to actually discuss the terms and change financial terms. Stock price is also one of the aspects of financial impact, and like biggest data breaches like Marriott, Equifax, Yahoo, they suffered an average drop in their stock price of 7.5%. The quite same is for Cathay Pacific Airlines, a case from Asia, 7%. But the issue is that this drop usually continues during 1 month, and after 1 month, if the strategy is correct, the position is fixed, and then companies usually need approximately several years to restore their position on the market. Yeah, but not all really are successful with that. The biggest company made that. Some of them did that better than others. The disclaimer: this is not an offer to buy the shares of the companies who have suffered the breach. Bankruptcy. Some of the companies were faced bankruptcy, like American company who was involved in debt collection activities, and they had many clients who was involved in providing healthcare services like LabCorp. So they have millions data of millions of patients, a lot of sensitive health data. And they suffered data leak, and they spent around 4 million for notifying all persons involved in this data leak. They spent a lot of $500,000 for consultants and help in order to get rid of the consequences of the data breach. And they realized that they are not able to continue their business because of their financial state. There were also several cases that were mentioned yesterday, such as companies like CodeSpace and Wi-Fi email that were also subject to cyber attack, and most of the data information that was necessary for continuing their business was wiped out, deleted. So they were not able to restore it, including backups. And so they were forced to shut down and to stop continuing doing their business. Reputation. Another aspect, not so tangible one, yes, but still important. Well, you can go to Google and to Google News and search for certain companies. If you search for Equifax, you will find information on how Equifax will try to manipulate you and try to avoid paying you a compensation for a breach. If you search for Facebook, well, there are also plenty of bad things about Facebook during last time, including Cambridge Analytica cases. So, well, reputation not so good. We can also have a look at brand index of different companies. These are just two examples. Well, the red point is the year where data breach took place, and Target is one of the American companies. They were actually one of the most successful in the market to restore after data breach, both with relation to their reputation and with relation to the stock price of their shares. And you see that reputation also, well, quite on the same level right now after the breach. But Uber was not successful, and they're still experiencing some problems with reputation, both in the US and EU, and they're still subject to certain fines in the European Union as well. There are also different studies with regards to reputation that I guess also should be taken into consideration. And you can see that 80% of consumers are ready to defect from a business if the information is compromised, and which is worse, that 85% is actually ready to tell and actively sharing information about data breaches. And also, almost half of them use social media for doing that. And also yesterday, one of the speakers mentioned that information via social media is being distributed faster than through an earthquake. Yeah, so imagine like some kind of data breach happens. Maybe it's not a data breach, yeah, but clients are affected. They're worried. They tweet, and then this is being spread, and you don't really have any time to react to that. A reputation can be harmed and damaged quite fast if you don't act very fast. So what about performance? Performance is very important for an impact on a team, and we see that the amount of attacks is rising. There is still a huge lack of cybersecurity professionals. That actually 63%, and what was a quite surprise for me, are planning to leave their industry because of overstress and a workload and big damages caused by data breaches. And examples of such impact on performance is, for example, problems with carrying out main activity or necessity to introduce new solutions that actually can distract a company or an organization from carrying their business. Most often this takes place when we deal with ransomware, when certain part of functionality is being shut down. and like in hospitals and communications and radios, etc. Some of the companies are forced to introduce new services, some kind of new offers for their clients that are not so beneficial for the company in order to make their clients stay, not leave after the breach. Also, there are legal proceedings that require some kind of investment, also from financial point of view and from occupational point of view. There also was one case in Latvia. Some of you may be familiar with that. There is such social media platform, CERT.LV in Latvia, and during elections day, their activity was paralyzed for a certain period of time because like Russian flag was posted on their homepage and people were not able to use social media. So this is also one kind of an example of impact on performance and also reputation. And of course, all financial impacts also influence performance indirectly. What is also important if we speak about public authorities, it's not so easy also in terms of reputation, if we come back to reputation, because, well, if you can choose between different private companies, there are certain competitors, you don't really can choose whether, like if it is a tax authority, yeah, you can of course move to another country, yeah, or wait for another elections. Well, in some cases it has some effect. Like in Latvia, we had also problems with tax authority and security things, but that actually influenced the fact that there is now a CERT in Latvia, and so there is some kind of potentially good impact on that. But let's see what happens with Bulgaria and that huge data leak with regards to taxpayers' data. So is it possible to reduce these negative impacts that I mentioned? And well, I think yes, and there are certain proactive steps that can be taken, and this can be technical organizational measures, and this can be also legal measures. We can use GDPR as the guidelines for introducing technical and organizational measures, well, not only for personal data, but for any data. Because the main thing that GDPR says that actually in order to protect your data, you need to take a risk-based approach. You need to assess your risks, to know your risks, you need to be able to calculate them and to cover them. And then you can introduce technical and organizational solutions. Well, these lists that are mentioned here, there are just several examples, but this is not any kind of mandatory requirements that are imposed by the GDPR, because in each case is individual, each risk is individual, so you should know how to cover risks with specific requirements that are suitable for your specific case. Of course, there are different international standards like ISO, NIST standards, and different guidelines that are also can be used as a good practice example to introduce certain solutions. There are certain examples, and some of these examples also were that are in red were related and were mentioned and are connected to the GDPR fines that I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, and that were mentioned by data protection authorities as potential technical and organizational measures that actually can eliminate the deficiencies that the companies and authorities faced with. This also included avoiding shared accounts, especially for admins. So this was cases, and this was a problem in several cases. This also involved secure certificates, secure network protocols, also involved a good team, and actually a team and not one person, because in certain cases there was like one person who managed bunch of different technical tasks and security tasks and was not capable really physically of doing that alone, but still had such a task, and that's why breach happened, because there was a conflict of interest and absence of capability to manage these tasks. Our monitoring is a very important thing, because and monitoring of logs, because, well, many companies in this GDPR fines cases, well, they did logging, but not always they did correct logging, and not always they really monitored their logs constantly. So what shall be done and what can be done? a general advice is to assess risks, cover them, monitor them, and cover new risks. So just like this is a never-ending cycle. It's not possible to use one set of secure procedures, guidelines, solutions, and then sit for the next 10 years and wait for something bad to happen. Because, for example, in certain countries, like in Latvia, public authorities and some other digital service providers have stricter requirements and have more specific requirements for security, but this also does mean that these requirements should not be updated. There is also a requirement for updating them. Legal measures. Well, legal measures can also be important sometimes, as we see with the case with vendors. Compliance with normative acts, not only GDPR, is a good way to reduce risks. Ensuring that all contracts are in place, and ensure that in-place do not disclose confidential information, that they actually are compliant with all internal guidelines, that they use internal assets of the company, like computers, passwords, in accordance with these guidelines, contracts with third parties and vendors, yes, also including such deals like M&A, yes, and paying attention to that. Consultations with security and data protection authorities, because sometimes it's required, especially if new technologies are introduced. And clear internal procedures, because if there are no procedures in place, it's quite hard to be also reactive. When something bad happens, and it can happen in any case, even if you think that you're 100% secure. And if you don't have any clear internal procedures, it's very hard to act when the breach happens and you don't know what to do. You're lost and you're losing your time. So reactive steps are quite simple if you have done your proactive job. You can then do everything as is written in guidelines, exercise your incident response playbook, and then you will not have a lot of troubles with fixing security holes, engage all necessary parties, also with legal measures by involving all the necessary parties, maybe consultants, maybe authorities. And what is also important on the reactive step here is communication. Also internal, so informing in place what is taking place, that they should not, what they should say to their clients, what they should do, what they should avoid doing, but also external communication is very important, because as in cases, for example, like Uber, where people get to know about the breach, not from the company, but from some kind of social media, well, the problem with reputations are much more serious than in case where the first point of information, the first source of information is the company organization itself, and it provides information about the breach. So I want to conclude this presentation with saying that it's very important to know the risks and to do your proactive steps and to assess them, to have information about them, and to know what kind of measures you can take. And if you're warned about the risks, although they can be very scary, they can be maybe they're not very pleasant, but it's very, very important to be informed, to be able to assess, and to be ready to know how to act if something bad happens. Thank you for your attention. There is also a slide with the possibility to subscribe to data news of our office, where you can have information all that breaches that I mentioned today in the presentation. And please, you're welcome to ask any questions if you have any.
Any questions from audience? I have one short question. What about insurance for these risks?
Well, in some countries it's more developed than in others. If we deal with personal data breaches that are executed by some kind of malicious actors that are not state actors, it's a bit easier, and in some cases insurance covers that, especially in the US. Well, in Latvia, it's not really a developed topic right now. So there is no pure cybersecurity insurance, and it's still in the stage of development. But the danger here is that with some cyber incidents, with some ransomware, it's not really possible sometimes to prove that this is not a state actor. And the issue with that is that, like in any case of any insurance doesn't cover any losses, costs that were suffered due to force majeure circumstances. And act of war, yes, and act of war is committed when it's committed by a state actor, is usually subject to such exceptions with regarding to force majeure. And if your company suffered, if your organization suffered from some kind of cyber incident that is part of an attack carried out by a state actor, well, there is a risk that it will not be subject to insurance.
Okay, any questions more?
Do you see it possible like that some, let's say, legal measures can replace lack of some technical measures, or communicational measures might replace, so like one group of measures might replace lack of some measures from other group?
Well, the question was whether any kind of legal or communicational measures would be able to replace any technical organizational measures. Well, sometimes we do that because in my practice, if you, for example, deal with a third party vendor and a client, well, doesn't have a capability, time, or wish to check this, really do a due diligence of this third party, the solution would be to draft such kind of a contract that would mean that this party would be responsible for any data breaches and problems that are that come from this party. And of course, this doesn't mean that you will have no problems, because if the problem takes place, then you need to negotiate that in certain cases this will involve court procedures, yes, but in any case, if the contract is drafted correspondingly, you will be able to avoid big losses. Yes, so this is in cases where you have a relationship with any third parties. Communicational measures, well, it's hard to say, because such communicational measures are usually useful when something bad already happened. And communicational measures can be used like to cover and not to scare people, to say that everything is okay, and also not to scare and to be kind of diplomatic with data protection authorities, with supervisory authorities, yes. But in any case, if they pay attention to you, then most probably such audit will happen, they will check you, and then like only communication will not be enough.
Okay, thank you, Anna, for a nice presentation. This is a small gift for you.
Thank you.